Presenting
The Complete
Orson Welles
and the Mercury Theatre on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
as the third man.
Stand by.
We'll be on the air in 15 seconds, Mr. Wells. Yes, I know.
Stand by, everybody.
Mercury Theatre on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of Bram Stoker's great novel,
Who knows
Dracula.
what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hello world, welcome to The Complete Orson Welles, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. This podcast will feature various classic radio programs ranging mostly from 1936 to 1952 that Orson either produced and directed, was featured on, or starred as a guest. If you enjoy my podcast, you can subscribe to receive notifications of new posts. Subscribing is free and only takes a moment. New episodes are posted weekly. If inclined, please leave a rating and or review on your preferred podcast service. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed the genius of Mr. Welles. The Black Museum, this week on The Complete Orson Welles. The 6th episode of The Black Museum, The Brass Button, and then the 7th episode of The Black Museum, A Can of Weed Killer. But The Black Museum aired in 1952 and in Europe in 1953.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. Here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of souvenirs, where everyday objects, a candlestick, a china doll, a broom, all are touched by murder. Now take this button, this brass button, the symbol of a barracks parade ground, but this was not found on any parade ground.
This is interesting, sir. A brass button.
Very interesting, Sergeant. It's from an army uniform.
Today, that button can be seen in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum. In just a moment, you will hear The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. Now, The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
Well, here we are in the Black Museum, Scotland Yard's Museum of Murder. Shelf upon shelf of curious and repellent objects. The urge to kill, illustrated in many, many ways. Here lies death. Here in the echoing stillnesses of the long room, one stands and looks at violence. expressed by the exhibits that line the shelves, the tables, and the walls. Repellent they may be, but by reason of their association only, for most of these tokens of murder are very ordinary objects. It's a medicine bottle. The drug it contained was beneficial in small doses. But since a woman was forced to drink the whole contents and died shortly after, the jury called it murder. Here's a kitchen knife. No household is without one, but this knife was not used solely for kitchen tasks. It was found embedded in a man's heart. Now, here we are, the brass button. It is. It's an innocuous, ordinary brass button. This was found near the dead body of a woman. But come back with me to the beginning of this story, to a day some years ago on the Common, outside the Kentish village of Wayfield. A girl was sitting beneath a tree, busily sketching. She was too engrossed to hear the approach of a young soldier until he spoke.
Hello?
Oh. Hello?
Sorry. Did I frighten you?
A little. I didn't hear you coming.
Oh, I made enough row. You were so busy with whatever you're doing. What are you doing?
Sketching.
Can I see?
You'll probably laugh.
No, I won't. Show me. That's very good.
Do you really think so?
Well, it's fine. You must be the one they call the Swamp Girl.
That's what they call me in the village. Poor, routine, dull people.
You don't like routine ways of living, do you? From what I've heard, you're something of a rebel.
Am I? You seem to know a lot about me.
Oh, I've heard things.
What kind of things?
About how you live in an old shanty at the edge of the swamp and how you roam the common and sketch and paint.
You're well informed.
Well, people talk about you sometimes. I was interested.
And so you came down to see for yourself. Oh, what's the matter? Couldn't you find a girl in town?
Don't say that. I wanted to meet you. To talk to you.
And now that you have, will you please go away and let me work?
Oh, you can work any time. I'll go away soon, if you're nice to me.
Go now. I've no intention of being nice to you, whatever you may think.
Come on.
Get away. When you found out so much about me, you might have also found out that I'm not interested in men. Least of all, soldiers.
That's not very kind. Come here.
No. Go away.
Come
Go on.
here.
No. No, please, please don't hurt me. No, please. No!
A woman screamed and cried for help on the Wayfield Common, but there was no one within a mile to hear her screams. 2 days later, in the post office at Wayfield, a letter was returned by the postmistress.
Mrs. Riley?
Yes, Jimmy?
That registered letter you sent me out with, there was nobody about to sign for it.
Oh, wasn't the swamp girl at home?
No, Mum. I called out this Morgan, but there wasn't any answer.
All right. You can deliver it tomorrow.
Yes, Mum.
Her name was Jeanette Morgan, but people of the town called her the Swamp Girl because of her vagrant, strange way of living. The next day, Jimmy, the postal messenger, rode out on his bike to deliver the registered letter, but once again the Swamp Girl was not at home. Then, on the way back, taking a shortcut, Jimmy found her.
Miss Morgan!
Jimmy saw only her legs at first protruding from a bush, which had been meant to hide her. At first he thought she was asleep. But he didn't think so for long.
She's dead. I've got to get the police.
Murder transforms a little village like Wayfield. All work ceases. The people gather in small groups in the streets to talk about it.
Yeah, have you heard the news? There's been a murder.
Aye? A murder?
Yes, out on the common.
Who?
The Swamp Girl. They found her body.
I was rather afraid that poor girl would come to grief sooner or later.
Well, Vicar, you know how it is these days. No parental authority.
Ah, more's the pity. Be that as it may, the men who did it must be found.
You know, Bert, if young Jimmy Miles hadn't come upon that body like he did, it might have lain there hidden for months, even years. I wonder how it happened.
Well, now, the way I sees it is this.
Now in the bar of the local, they sipped their beer and discussed the sensation. Jimmy became something of a hero. He'd found the body and even now is being questioned by the London detectives from Scotland Yard.
This is Jimmy Miles, sir.
Hello, Jimmy. You found the body, I understand.
Yes, Inspector Gallico. Was she really murdered, sir?
Well, that's what we must find out. And you can help us.
Oh, really? How?
I believe you rode out to her shanty at the edge of the swamp to deliver a registered letter to Miss Morgan.
Yes, that's right, sir. She used to get a registered letter every month. I always took them out.
And she had to sign for them, of course.
Oh, yes.
Then you got to know her, I suppose.
Well, don't tell the postmistress, but sometimes I did stay and talk for a while.
Uh-huh. And what was she like?
Oh, she was nice, really friendly. People said she was a bit peculiar, but I never thought so. And she could draw, sir.
Now, think carefully, Jimmy. Did you ever see her with anyone, man or woman?
Oh, never, Inspector. She had no friends around here. She once told me so.
No friends, I see. Now, about this registered letter, was that the first time you had taken it out?
Oh, no, sir. I went out the previous day, on Monday, but she wasn't there.
Did you call out?
Yes, and I went round the common, to the places where she used to go and sketch. I knew most of them.
And she wasn't anywhere about?
No, nowhere at all.
What time of the day was this?
Well, I just left the post office just on 10. It's about half an hour's ride.
Oh, you were out there by 10:30. All right, Jimmy. Thank you very much.
Is that all, Inspector Gallico?
Well, that's all for the moment. You've been very helpful.
A lucky witness, young Jimmy Miles. A break for Inspector Gallico early in the case. For with the evidence of the police surgeon, certain facts could be established.
What's your verdict on the post-mortem, Doctor?
Well, the cause of death didn't give us any trouble, Inspector. She was strangled.
What about the time of death?
That's not so easy. I'd say she died 48 hours ago, at least.
Wait a minute. That means before noon on Monday. It ties in, Doctor.
Good. But at what time before noon, I would not care to predict. The contents of the stomach indicate she'd had breakfast.
Then sometime between breakfast and noon, she met her death. And she was nowhere about 10:30 when the postal boy brought her letter. What about that letter, Sergeant?
I have it here, sir.
Who is it from?
It's from Mrs. Morgan of Tunbridge Wells, her mother.
Money, I suppose.
£10, sir. And a plea to come home and live a normal life.
Poor Mrs. Morgan. Her daughter couldn't even die a normal death.
The pattern of the crime begins to make itself clear. The victim's identity is known. The approximate time and the cause of death is known. Now the hunt will begin for the killer.
Here is a police message. The body of a woman named Jeanette Morgan has been discovered on Wayfield Common. Evidence suggests that she met her death by strangulation sometime before noon on October the 19th. Any person who was in the vicinity of Wayfield Common on that day, or can give any information, should communicate with the nearest police station in order to assist in the search for the murderer.
And in this, the police will be aided by a brass button. That same brass button that today can be found in the Black Museum.
In just a moment, we will continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. And now we continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
To a small cottage in Tunbridge Wells now go the detectives from Scotland Yard. To a house with the blinds drawn, where a thin, bitter woman answers their questions in a strangely lifeless voice.
Yes, I knew. I knew it was Jeanette when I saw the newspapers.
Why didn't you get in touch with us, Mom?
Oh, I knew you'd get in touch with me if you wanted me. Besides, what business is it of mine?
But she was your daughter.
Was she? Jeanette's younger sister lives here with me. Works at a shop nearby. She's my daughter.
Yes, I see what you mean.
I warned her. I told her it had come to no good end, living that strange and unnatural kind of way.
Mrs. Morgan, we won't trouble you any longer, but could you tell us, did your daughter have any close men friends?
Men friends?
Yes.
Jeanette? I wish she had. But a boyfriend would have been too ordinary for her. She had to be different. She had to be the swamp girl.
I'm sorry.
Why did it have to happen to her? To me? Why? Why?
Good evening.
Good evening, Vicar. I'm from the police.
The police? I don't recognize you.
No, sir. You see, I'm not from the local police. I'm from London. And I'm down here in connection with the murder.
Oh, yes, terrible, yes. But how can I help you?
Well, you can help a good deal, sir. You see, the local police are pretty short-handed, and Inspector Gallagher has decided that our next move should be to make a very thorough search of the common, particularly round about where the body was found.
Oh, I see. And I suppose you want some help from my parishioners?
Yes, sir, that's roughly the idea.
Ah, very well, then. We'll help you in every way we can. You can depend upon us.
All right, Sergeant. Let's get on with the search.
Very good, sir.
You take Smart and work in from the road.
All right,
I'll
sir.
take Rogers and work in from the field side. I'll meet you by the ditch.
Yes, that'll be all right, sir. Here's a sketch, sir. It's a pencil drawing of that view across there, I'd say, sir.
Yes, it is. Unfinished, too. She might have been working on it. What else have you got there?
This is interesting, sir. It's a brass button.
Very interesting, Sergeant. It's from an army uniform.
Uh-huh.
Where's the nearest camp to Wayfield?
I believe there's one across the river, sir, about 2 miles away.
Inspector Gallico left his sergeant in charge of searching the common and went to the army camp to enlist the help and cooperation of the commanding officer.
Gentlemen to see you, sir, from Scotland Yard.
Oh, ask him to come in, will you, Captain?
Yes, sir. Will you come through, please? Thank you. Major Curtis, I'm Inspector Gallico from Scotland Yard.
How do you do, Inspector? Sit down, won't you? Well, now, how can I help you, Inspector?
I'm here to investigate the murder of Jeanette Morgan.
Oh, the Swamp Girl mystery.
Yes.
Yes, tragic business.
Major, not far from where the body was left, we found this.
An army button.
That's why I'm here.
I see. Well, I'd be glad to assist in any way I can, but permit me to hope that it wasn't any one of my men.
How many men are there in camp here, Major?
Well, at the present time, our unit's strength is 120. We're an engineer section, as you may know.
120 men, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if any of them has a button missing from his tunic.
Well, if you wish, I'll order an immediate inspection.
Not yet, sir. You can assist me in another way first.
Oh? How, Inspector?
Well, I want a list of all those absent from camp on Monday morning.
Oh, that should be easy. There's no leave on any week morning. If anyone was away from camp, it must have been for a special reason.
Anyone at all, between the hours of 7 in the morning and 1 o'clock.
Well, the adjutant can help us there. I'll get him to make out a list of all those away from camp on Monday morning immediately.
The commanding officer was away a short time, and on his return he brought with him a piece of paper containing a list of names. He gave it to the London detective.
Yes, there you are, Inspector. 5 men were away from camp during the time you asked about.
Sergeant Willis, A Company.
Yes, he's our caterer at the present time. We're understaffed, of course. Sergeant Willis and Private Fields were in town with a provision truck.
They were together?
Yes, we could always check that with one or the other.
I don't think I'm very interested in those two.
Oh?
What about Private Liston, B Company?
Oh, he's the unit driver. I sent him into town shortly before noon. On a private errand.
Shortly before noon, Well, that leaves 2. Corporal Paul Ferris?
Oh, he's our mailman. He leaves every morning at 8 o'clock and drives the mail truck in to pick up the unit mail bag.
From the Wayfield post office, I suppose?
Yes.
What time does he generally return?
Oh, sometimes by 9. Though on occasions he has to wait for registered mail, you know. I've even known him to be held up as late as 11 or even 11:30.
Would anyone know what time he returned on Monday?
I'll find that out for you.
Now, this last man, Private Williams, A Company.
Yes, if you ask me, he might be your man, Inspector.
Oh, why, sir?
Because he was absent without leave. From 900 hours on Monday morning until 1400 hours.
From 9 till 2?
Yes.
That's interesting. I'd better see him. And the postal chappie.
I'll have them paraded. Corporal Ferris, Private Williams, this is Inspector Gallico from Scotland Yard. He has some questions to ask you both.
Thank you, sir. Corporal Ferris, we'll take you first.
Yes, Inspector.
What time did you leave camp last Monday morning on your mail run?
At 800 hours, sir.
And what time did you return?
Well, if I remember correctly, the mail was brought round rather late that morning, Corporal. Yes, sir. I was just about to explain to the Inspector. I had to wait for several registered letters.
What time did you actually return?
Shortly before 1100 hours, sir.
Thank you, Corporal. Now, Private Williams. You were absent without leave throughout Monday morning.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to give a satisfactory account of your whereabouts?
I'd prefer not to, sir.
Private Williams has consistently refused any explanation of his conduct, Inspector.
Oh, that's rather unwise, Williams. If you have an alibi, you'll need it. This is an investigation into murder.
Murder? I didn't do no murder. I was with me girl in Wayfield.
Ah.
What's her name?
Hey, Susie Walker, 9 High Street. You asked her if I wasn't there. Oh, I didn't want to get her into any trouble, you understand, that's all. But murder? Oh, I don't know nothing about the girl who was killed. Honest, I don't.
Well, we'll check your statement, Williams. I've finished with them now, sir.
Corporal Ferris, Private Williams, dismiss.
Inspector Gallico drove into Wayfield to number 9 High Street.
Oh, no. Susie wasn't out with him that day. I remember it distinctly. She went over to see her girlfriend at Kenbury. Well, you can ask her yourself.
Susie Walker was a small, frightened girl, the counterpart of Private Williams.
Oh, Inspector, I hope he hasn't done anything wrong up at the camp in not telling them where he was. Oh, that'd be terrible. He wouldn't tell a lie, I know that. I'm sure of it. You see, we'd had a quarrel, and he wanted to see me. I didn't dare let Mother know, so I made up a story about it.
She confirmed his alibi, and Gallico went next to the post office to interview Mrs. Riley.
Just one inquiry I'd like to make, Mrs. Riley.
Oh, anything at all, Inspector. Anything. To think of that poor girl. And my Jimmy Miles finding a body.
Mrs. Riley, can you recall offhand whether you had any registered mail for the Army unit on Monday?
Registered mail on Monday. Well, I couldn't remember offhand, Inspector, but I'll have it here in the book. Wait a minute and I'll look it up. No, there was nothing on Monday. There hasn't been a registered letter for the Army since last week.
Then the postal corporal wouldn't have been delayed on Monday morning?
Oh, not him. He was in for his mail bag and out again quick as you like. Didn't even stop for a chat. I remember that now.
What time would he have left here, Mrs. Riley? Can you give me any idea?
I can give it to you right on the dot. It's come back to me quite plainly. We open at 8:30. Corporal Ferris was here waiting when I arrived to open up.
8:30. And he didn't stay?
No, not more than a few minutes.
The inspector picked up Sergeant Worthington, and together they drove back to the army camp. A few orders from the commanding officer, and Corporal Ferris was paraded once more, and his gear searched. At the bottom of his kit bag, they found what they were looking for.
Here we are, sir. A battle jacket with one button missing.
And it matches, Sergeant.
Ferris? What have you got to say about this? This is crazy, sir. I don't know anything about it.
She was sketching, wasn't she, Ferris? She drew a pencil drawing of you, isn't that so?
You're bluffing. She didn't do any drawing of me. It was a landscape scene.
A landscape scene, yes, so it was. And that fact has never been mentioned in any of the papers. Only the sergeant and I knew that, Ferris. And the killer.
Paul Ferris was taken into custody, charged with the murder of Jeanette Morgan, the swamp girl.
Silence in court!
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the facts in this case as related by the witnesses which have been called, both by the defense and the prosecution. The prisoner stands before you accused of the crime of murder, a particularly brutal murder, a murder without motive. But lack of motive is not necessarily a defense. It is for you to decide whether the facts which you have learnt during this case, not only the words spoken by the witnesses, but the mute testimony of the material objects placed before you, justify your verdict, which must be beyond all reasonable doubt.
The brass button and a slip of the tongue led to his downfall. Today, that brass button occupies a place of honor in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment. Now here in person is Orson Welles.
The picture was completed when the tracks of a vehicle were found some 50 yards away from the scene of the crime. The tracks were identified as those of the mail truck, of which the driver had been Corporal Paul Ferris. The defense did their utmost to prove insanity, but the jury were in little doubt that the man was sane, and that his advances repulsed, he'd strangled the swamp girl to death. They took 17 minutes to find him guilty, and the brass button which had led to his arrest was Exhibit A on the courtroom table, from where at the end of the trial and the pronouncement of the inevitable death sentence, it was taken to its present resting place in the Black Museum. And now, until we meet next time in the same place, and I tell you another story about the Black Museum, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles, is presented by arrangement with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Radio Attraction. The program is written by Creswick Jenkinson, with music composed and conducted by Sidney Torch. Produced by Harry Allen Towers.
Museum, a repository of death. Here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a goldfish bowl, an automatic gas range, a child's perambulator, all are touched by murder. Here's a can of weed killer. It's a familiar object. Every suburbanite with a patch of garden has used this, or something very much like it. After a while, one tires of pulling up the weeds and buys weed killer. Eliminates the backache.
Do you know offhand, Superintendent, whether the poison in weed killer deteriorates or becomes stronger with the passage of time?
Well, I'm not certain, Inspector. Any chemist could answer that, I imagine.
In this situation, some chemists will have to answer that.
Well, today, that can of weed killer can be seen in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Well, here we are, in the Black Museum, Scotland Yard's mausoleum of murder. Yes, here lies death. Here it is, preserved in objects which seem to reflect the horror of the crimes in which they once played their parts. Here's an arrow, full-feathered, tapered, cleanly steel-tipped. It's a graceful object made for flight and skill in an ancient art. Even in the act which brought it here, this weapon was thwarted. No arching bow sent it on its way. A powerful hand thrust sharply in the dark. And this arrow turned dagger and stabbed a life away. And here's a chalice, jeweled, lovely. It's a work of art. Hard to find it here. And yet this achievement of the goldsmith's skill carried murder within its curving bowl. Yes. Now here we are. Here's the tin of weed killer. It's dried up now. Its contents are forever useless for any purpose. Still, was the poison it once contained any more powerful for evil than the hidden poison which flowed through the place where this tale took place? Was in fact a lovely place, an English village. Its single street strung like a hammock between two hills, on one of which stand the remains of an ancient Norman castle. An ideal place to live, one would say, as John Ashley very often said to his wife Helen and his daughter Joy.
Remember, Helen, how we used to wish for a life like this when we were struggling in London? Before you came to us, Joy, my dear.
I remember. You've accomplished it for us, John. You may clear the table, Sarah.
Very well, ma'am.
From all the stories you told, Dad, I'll never marry a young lawyer.
Oh, you might do worse. You might do worse at that. What's the matter, Helen?
That pain again, John. Oh, it'll pass. As soon as I've had some tea.
I wish you'd see Dr. Gordon about this, Helen. It worries me.
Oh, yes, a very nice place to live. And a nice family in the house on the slope of the hill. An occasional complaint, of course. Even an occasional disagreement, but everything quite normal. Except to certain people in the village below.
Why he won't let his wife join our garden club, I never understand, never. And she does exactly as he tells her. And the way she's under his thumb, no woman would permit it unless she was deathly afraid of something.
That was Mrs. Brooks. Very interested in gardening is Mrs. Brooks. Her husband sells the gardening tools and materials locally. Very interested in better trees and flowers.
I was her first friend in the village. I watched her just waste away. It must be his fault. You know, sometimes I believe he beats her.
Miss Goodson, that was a worthy soul. If she read more books, perhaps she'd have less time on her hands. As it is, she has a bit too much time on her hands.
doubt it, not for a minute. Wait till Martha Gordon hears of this.
Well, I'd like not to believe it, but if you tell me, dear. No question, my dear, no question.
The best authority, my own eyes.
If there was something to be done.
That was, well, the climate of public opinion, at least on the disturbed side at the time of the Sunday luncheon in the Ashley household.
Ah, an excellent luncheon, Helen, my dear. You must compliment cook.
Oh, John.
What?
I think I'm going to faint.
Helen.
Mother. Oh, it's taking me inside. I can't breathe. Oh, the pain.
Helen, the wine.
Mother, let me get you. Oh,
Try quickly. Get Dr. Gordon here at once. If you have to, take the car and fetch him.
Oh, I did, of course.
Helen, I'm getting you to bed. Sarah, please help me. Mrs. Ashley's taken ill.
The poor woman.
Take her arm, Sarah. Gently now.
Carefully, gently, they took Helen Ashley up to her bedroom. The doctor came at Joy's urgent, even tearful call.
Please, Dr. Gordon. My mother's taken terribly ill. Please, hurry.
But the doctor wasn't half as alarmed as the family.
So I don't believe there's really anything to worry about. Gastric disturbances can be painful, but my prescription will ease her. In the meantime, company will take her mind off the pain, or what's left of it.
Then it will do her good to see Miss Goodson.
A little gossip never hurt any woman. If you need me, I'll be available, and I'll drop you.
However, the good Miss Goodson was not as easily satisfied as the doctor. She stayed with Helen Ashley some 15 minutes and then entered the living room to announce...
Of course, it's really not my business, except I've grown so fond of your wife since you've been living here.
What is it, Miss Goodson?
Well, since you ask, she's a lot more ill than you or David Gordon seem to think. I suggest a nurse at once.
Do you really think so?
But the doctor said...
I don't use words lightly, Mr. Ashley. And I've been around illness all my life. I nursed my father for 10 years. I know sickness when I see it. And I know just the woman, Nurse Thomas. She's just a practical, but very efficient.
Nurse Thomas came to the Ashley house at once and took charge of the patient. However, a little before 9 o'clock that evening...
I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Ashley, but I have to leave now.
Really, nurse? I was under the impression you would stay overnight at least.
I can't. I have my children. They'll have had no dinner until I get home, and my mother, past 80, you know.
Is my wife resting well?
Quite easily. She complained that Dr. Gordon's medicine caught at the back of her throat, but, that means nothing. I'm sorry, but I'll have to leave. I'll be back first thing tomorrow.
The Ashley household retired for the night. John left the nightlight burning in the bedroom. At 2 a.m., John awoke, looked at his wife. Then he stumbled to the door of Joy's room and knocked.
Dad, what is it?
Joy, your mother is dead.
Helen Ashley passed away in her sleep. There was mourning in the house on the slope of the hill. In the village below.
I knew it. I told him she was desperately ill. I told him.
It's too bad. Such a nice little person. So sweet. How could she have married that man? I hope they find him out. Never even a civil good day to a person. Do you really suppose there is something suspicious?
I wouldn't put it past him. Why, Nurse Thomas says... I felt something strange the moment I walked in the door. If I had any influence with my brother, I'd have made him refuse to sign a death certificate. Heart disease. Huh.
It was talk, idle talk. At least it seemed so at first. But it had its effect. It accumulated as some poisons do. And it had a result, as some poisons do.
Here's another of these letters, Superintendent.
Oh, any signature this time?
Yes, sir.
That's a change. Who's it from?
It's signed by Nurse Thomas. It's a bit vague, sir, about on the same lines as the other anonymous letters which we've already received.
Oh, all right. Well, let me have a look at it. Dear sir, I have come to the conclusion that it is my duty to draw your attention to the rumors which are common knowledge throughout the neighborhood concerning Mr. Ashley and the recent death of his wife, Helen. I can claim to have a personal knowledge of the case, as I was the nurse in charge. Now, what do you make of that, Sergeant?
There's certainly nothing anonymous about this letter, sir.
I feel that you should know my suspicions are shared by friends and neighbors of the Ashleys, and that all of us consider our duty that justice should be done. Yours truly, etc. That justice should be done. Oh, well, we shall see. Sergeant.
Yes, sir?
I think we'd better have a little talk with Nurse Thomas. So you believe, Nurse, that the police ought to look into this?
I certainly do. There must be some reason back of all this talk. Where there's smoke, you know, Superintendent.
Nurse Thomas, may I remind you that I didn't get to the rank of superintendent of this district by listening to rumors. Have you any facts?
Well, I'm not a detective.
Well, tell me what you know, Nurse.
Sarah Freeman, she's the Ashley housemaid, swears that he didn't drink any of the wine at lunch. That was hardly his custom.
Go on.
I've been on a good many cases. This one was really peculiar. The doctor wasn't disturbed any more than her husband was. But she died at 2 a.m. The whole thing is highly suspicious. And Sarah thinks...
Now, never mind the rumors, Nurse. However, I may make a few inquiries.
The superintendent knew his duty. He took the liberty of asking John Ashley to stop in and chat with him.
You realize, of course, Mr. Ashley, that this is strictly on an informal basis.
I can think of no reason why it should be formal.
Well, there have been reports, rumors. I dare say you've heard a few.
I've heard all of them. In fact, to spare my daughter, I've sent her up to London to stay with a cousin for a while.
Yes, it is most distressing. I assume, Mr. Ashley, you would like to set all this gossip at rest. Put an end to it once and for all.
Nothing will be a greater relief to me. Have you any suggestions, Superintendent?
Yes, I have. It's drastic, but, well, if all is well, as I have every reason to believe, it may be unpleasant, but it would certainly be effective.
What is it, sir?
Exhumation of your wife's body and a post-mortem, with your express approval.
As you wish, sir. I shall be glad to cooperate in every way possible.
The vital step had been taken. From now on, John Ashley was engaged in a fight for his life. Much was against him, and not the least was the tin of weed killer, which can be seen today in the Black Museum.
And now we continue with the Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
They did not permit Helen Ashley to rest for long. The exhumation order was signed and the post-mortem proceeded. Shortly thereafter, a coroner's inquest was held. The jury were all natives of the district, of course, all of them with some contact with the rumors which seemed to grow wilder and more frequent as the secrecy continued. There were 3 witnesses at the inquest. First, Dr. David Gordon himself.
Yes, I performed the post-mortem and the subsequent analyses.
What did he find?
My findings were confirmed by the analyst for the Home Office, to whom I transmitted them through the Superintendent of Police, together with the necessary items for his own tests.
And the report, Doctor?
Helen Ashley's body contained 18 milligrams of arsenic, sufficient indeed to cause death.
Mr. Brooks, purveyor of gardening tools and materials, being away on a business trip, Mrs. Brooks took the witness stand.
Yes, when my husband is away, I run the business. I'm completely familiar with all his records.
Oh, you are you? What about it?
Well, less than 2 years ago, we sold a tin of weed killer to Mr. Ashley. The brand was that type which contains arsenic.
The third and last witness was housemaid Sarah Freeman.
Mr. Ashley was in the pantry where the wine was kept for 10 minutes at least that Sunday. I know because he held me up setting the table and all.
Did she serve any particular item that day?
There was the wine. It was Mrs. Ashley's favorite brand. She always took a glass with a big meal of the day. The bottle was open in the pantry.
And, of course, Mr. Ashley did not drink any that Sunday.
I offered it to him myself. He refused, and I poured some for the poor lady.
The verdict to the coroner's jury is obvious, isn't it?
Well, here's a pretty kettle of fish. A coroner's court not only finding in favor of murder, but naming the murderer.
Nobody could say they were slow to come to a decision, sir.
On the contrary, Sergeant. I only hope they haven't been a little too fast. Oh, well, we shall see. Meantime, thank goodness our responsibility is going to be a shared one from now on.
You mean it's a case for the yard, sir?
No doubt about it.
Yes, sir?
Put me through to London. I want to speak to Inspector Glenn at Scotland Yard.
Glenn here?
This is Superintendent Maxwell. You remember the case I sent you the papers on last week, Inspector? The Ashley case?
Oh, yes. Any developments?
There certainly are. If possible, I'd like you to come down here straight away. I'm glad Scotland Yard has come into this, Inspector. What with the verdict and all, we're hardly equipped down here to complete the evidence.
The verdict, yes. We find that Helen Ashley died of acute arsenical poisoning and that the poison was administered by her husband, John Ashley. I've seen a few cases with more complete evidence in my time.
Yeah, no doubt. So have I. But what can we do? Besides arrest Ashley and have him arraigned?
Nothing, I'm afraid. Nothing at all. Well, he hardly seems the type to obstruct justice by running away.
Far from obstructing justice, John Ashley helped the authorities in every way he could.
I understand, Inspector. What did you say your name was?
Glenn. Inspector William Glenn, CID.
Yes, of course. I assume you'll be looking for the weed killer there's been so much talk about.
Yes, we will.
Yes, well, you'll find it in the garage with the gardening things. It's in there somewhere. Exactly where, I'm afraid I can't tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Ashley. Now, if you're quite ready, shall we go along?
Yes, why not?
If you'll just precede me.
It's quite warm out, I gather. I doubt if I need a top coat.
No, and my car's at your door.
There he is!
I'm sorry, I didn't know they'd gathered out here. We could have used the back way.
Oh, no matter. I can face them. I won't do anything but call names.
John Ashley was formally charged the next morning and held for the next assizes. The case for the Crown was not remarkable for its completeness. Inspector Glenn was a witness.
The defendant admitted possessing the weed killer. In fact, he helped us to find it in his garage.
Have you uncovered any evidence, Inspector, to indicate that my client did, in fact, administer the poison?
Poison is almost always given in secret. One rarely has a witness to the fact.
Dr. Gordon repeated his testimony at the coroner's inquest. There was no cross-examination. Sarah Freeman, on the other hand, was the subject of quite intense questioning by the defense.
Why did you find it worthy of remark that Mr. Ashley spent some time in your pantry?
I'd never known him to be in there before.
I say to you that almost every Sunday before luncheon, he did go into the pantry from the garden to wash his hands.
No, he didn't.
Many times.
No, he always went upstairs.
I submit to you that it was a long way to the bathroom upstairs.
Not very.
Do you realize that Mr. Ashley is in peril of his life?
Yes, sir, I do.
And you stand here swearing that it was unusual for him to use the pantry to wash his hands?
Yes, sir, I do.
Sarah Freeman, are you telling the truth?
I swore on a Bible, sir.
Are you telling the truth?
Yes, sir, I am.
No further questions.
Next in the parade of witnesses was Nurse Thomas. She told her story, her experience, and her suspicions. Once again, counsel for the defense took over.
You are a practical nurse, is that correct?
I am.
You are not registered. Your training has not been formal.
I know my job.
Answer the question.
I know my job.
But you are not a registered nurse.
I am a practical nurse.
When you left the Ashley house at 9 o'clock, were you satisfied that the patient was in no danger?
I had to go home.
If you felt she was in danger, would you have gone?
I had to go home.
For personal reasons?
My mother is past 80. My children needed their dinner.
I suggest to you, Mrs. Thomas, that a registered nurse would not have left. Then you were satisfied that the patient was in no danger.
I had to leave. I told Mr. Ashley.
Did the patient complain to you about the medicine?
She complained to the maid. The maid told me.
What did you do about it?
I tasted it myself.
Did the medicine affect you?
Not at all.
What was the dose?
2 teaspoonfuls and a little water 3 times a day.
Did you give the medicine before you left?
I did.
And you were satisfied there was no danger to the patient?
I had to go when I did.
Very well. You had to go when you did. That is all.
The stubbornness, the slight irregularities in behavior of this nurse seemed to be having their effect on the jury. There was a feeling of impatience, even of doubt, in the courtroom as counsel for the defense called
Miss Joy Ashley, please.
The girl, quiet, composed, took the stand in her father's defense.
Miss Ashley, I know you realize that your father is on trial here for his life.
I do.
Can you say without reservation that you're going to tell the absolute truth?
Yes, sir, I am.
If you had any doubt of his innocence, what would you do?
Tell the truth. My mother is dead. If I thought for a moment that my father had done it, even then I would tell the truth.
Very well. Now then, the 3 of you had luncheon together that day.
We did.
At the same time, from the same main dishes?
Yes, sir.
There has been some doubt cast on the contents of a certain bottle of wine. Your former housemaid has testified that the bottle was nearly empty at the end of the meal, that she threw the bottle away. Was this common practice, do you know?
It was.
I see. Now then, what do you recall concerning the serving of that wine that day?
Sarah, the maid, offered it to my father first, as she always did.
Did he accept it?
No, he did not.
What did the maid do next?
She offered it to my mother. Mother took some.
And then?
Then Sarah offered it to me. I let her fill my glass. It was excellent. I asked for some more. I remember Mother expressing her surprise that I should drink 2 glasses of wine.
Thank you, Miss Ashley. That is all.
It was dramatically staged. The Crown had no questions for Joy Ashley. The defense rested. After a brief recess, he began his summation. Quickly, he reviewed the evidence as presented, never denying the fact that Helen Ashley had died of arsenical poisoning. But he did conclude.
We have made no attempt to deny the scientific facts of this case. But I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that at no time has my client's behavior even suggested guilt. More, I suggest that at no point has my honored colleague proved motive, much less the actual administration of the lethal dose. And I go on to suggest that there exists a reasonable doubt concerning my client's guilt in this matter. He has pleaded not guilty. I suggest that not guilty is the only proper verdict in the case of the Crown versus John Ashley.
The jury was out for 3 hours. The verdict was brief.
We find the prisoner not guilty.
John Ashley was a free man. But one thing he never learned, not to the day of his death, but privately the jury sent this message in writing to the judge who presided at the trial. We are satisfied on the evidence that Helen Ashley received a dangerous dose of arsenic on Sunday, July 16th, but we are not satisfied that it was the immediate cause of her death. Nor does the evidence satisfy us concerning how or by whom this arsenic was administered. We cannot take a man's life when reasonable doubt such as this exists in our minds. We have therefore returned the verdict, not guilty. And still today, that tin of weed killer has its place in the Black Museum.
Here in person is Orson Welles.
Helen Ashley died of arsenical poisoning. There was no question about that. There was grave question as to how the poison was administered. But whether it was in the wine or the food or the medicine, no one knows. John Ashley died some few years after his trial in poverty, a weary, broken man. In his case, the doctor certified his death and no question was raised, save by those who remembered the charges against him. and the wagging tongues of the gossips in the kindly-seeming English village where he'd made his home. Those who remembered had cause for thought. Could it be said that John Ashley died by gossip? Certainly not by any other poison. Now, until we meet next time, we meet in the same place and I tell you another story about the Black Museum. I remain, as always, obediently yours.
The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles, is presented by arrangement with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Radio Attractions. The program is written by Ara Marion, with original music composed and conducted by Sidney Torch. Produced by Harry Allen Towers.
There's the Black Museum.
Thank you for listening to and showing your support for my podcast. If you would like to receive notifications of when new episodes are posted, please subscribe to my channel. Subscriptions are 100% free, and they really help me get an idea of how I'm doing.